Good evening. You're with Stephen Helfer, and the show is the smoking section. We have been on CCTV now for about 15 years, so that's probably about, my guess is, close to 750 shows of the smoking section here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, thanks to CCTV and thanks to Comcast, basically, which is supporting this station in its agreement with the city of Cambridge. And last week, my good friend Paul Neff was trying to call, but the number was not on the screen, unfortunately. So I have remembered to put it on the screen. And if anybody has any questions or comments or arguments, you are more than welcome to call in. Now, there was an interesting story that a friend sent me on the internet and by email, and evidently the FDA has been doing some experiments with nicotine, administering it to squirrel monkeys. And Jane Goodall, who is of course the famous naturalist who is very much involved with what are called primates, basically, which seem to be monkeys, I think. And she, with some other people in the animal rights movement, sent a letter to the FDA saying that experimenting with nicotine on squirrel monkeys was horrific, and that everybody knows the effects of smoking, and that there was no need to subject these monkeys. Now, what was really a kind of objectionable from my point of view is administering nicotine to monkeys is really, nicotine is a very harmless substance. Even researchers in the anti-smoking field pretty much say nicotine is about like caffeine. It does not cause cancer. Its effects are only positive, and what they maintain is that separated from tobacco, it's not even addicting. So that, for example, the FDA itself says that using nicotine replacement therapies, which are therapies that contain nicotine but don't have tobacco, that there is no danger of becoming addicted with these. And it is well known in the science profession that getting animals addicted to nicotine is almost, if not completely impossible. So Jane Goodall is really very incorrect in saying that for the FDA to administer nicotine to monkeys is a form of experimentation, is in some way abusive. Now, of course, there are other circumstances regarding this issue, and one of those circumstances is that, well, I'm going to take a call right now. Let's see who we've got on the line. Welcome to the smoking section. Can you hear me?
I can just barely hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, Paul, thank you for calling.
I'm disappointed to hear that about Jane Goodall.
What do you know about Jane Goodall?
Well, that she worked with chimps. I've known about her since about 1964, and I was really interested in primates back then.
Oh, really?
That, amazingly, she's kept at it all these years.
Well, I mean,
it must be very discouraging to watch, the destruction of their habitat and stuff like that, and to put the idea of monkeys smoking, apes, they're actually apes, of apes smoking On the same level as vivisection
Huh.
or other things she's witnessed.
Well, I don't think she's doing that. I hope not.
Well, I mean, the word horrific.
Yes, yes. Well, you know, Paul, there's a little bit more to the story. And the little bit more to the story is that these, and I guess these are monkeys. I don't know, what is the difference between a monkey and an ape? Are you there?
I can't really hear you. The difference between a monkey and an ape, apes are more human-like. They don't have tails. They're more intelligent.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well,
Was she talking about baboons by any chance?
no, she's talking about squirrel monkeys.
Oh, squirrel monkeys, yeah, of course. And they used to sell those in pet stores. Anyway.
Well, one thing is with these monkeys is that, and she brought it up in this letter, is that they are in solitary confinement. And they have been in solitary confinement for a long period of time.
Well, that's solitary confinement is extremely inhumane.
Yes, no, so she was not simply objecting to the administration of nicotine to these animals, but also the kind of conditions that they're living in.
Yeah. I mean, the nicotine would seem a perk for the chimpanzees, frankly. It would seem like something they would like, a little relief from the rigors of the rest of the experimentation.
Certainly, it's very mild experimentation, and of course, sometimes monkeys or apes in zoos will start smoking of their own accord, picking up cigarette butts.
You know, I mean, that was one of the first things I learned that countered the anti-smoking narrative was that primates naturally smoke.
Yes, if given the opportunity.
Yes.
Given the opportunity.
Yeah.
Paul.
Well, that's about all I had to say
let me.
for now.
Well, you're on the line.
Yeah.
How is the audio right now?
It's workable.
Workable. Okay.
Yeah, I can talk to you.
Because on our Facebook page today was a story that L.A. is really poised, perhaps, to be the marijuana capital of the country.
Yeah.
And they envision the city, taking in $50 million a year in marijuana taxes.
Yeah.
But a lot of the marijuana enthusiasts are very upset because there's almost no place you can smoke it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, because you cannot smoke marijuana in any place where the smoking of tobacco is prohibited.
Right, predictably. So, and plus a lot of marijuana smokers do smoke, generally.
Well, and I mean, you can't smoke marijuana on beaches, you can't smoke marijuana in restaurants, bars. In fact,
I always tell everybody, it's going to be covered by the anti-smoking laws.
yeah, well, I guess
They're
these,
not going to exempt it.
they're getting,
So, I mean, that's a natural alliance right there.
well, do you think they might exempt it?
No, there's no way. It's not possible.
You don't think they could say, well, you can smoke marijuana in this cafe, but you can't smoke tobacco?
That maybe they could do, but not in apartments.
Right, not in public
They
housing.
don't have the at-home ban. You're right, nor the public, but just probably the indoors
Right.
cafes.
Well, I don't know. It's an interesting development,
I
and
think if they adjust the laws so that you can smoke marijuana in some places,
like let's say in cafes.
tobacco's just going to follow along naturally.
You think
And
so?
we'll get used to it. That's what I would predict.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for calling.
Yeah, I'm glad I could add a positive note.
It is a positive note. I don't think you need to write Jane Goodall off completely. I mean, she
No,
just.
I understand that now. I wasn't able to hear you well at first.
Well, I mean, the thing is, she really doesn't know a lot about the tobacco issue. So,
Right.
I mean, I do think animal
I'm really against solitary confinement for people or animals.
Yes. All right, thanks for calling.
Okay, bye-bye, Steve.
Take care. Well, I was going to, on that subject of nicotine, there was a recent column in the New York Times by a psychiatrist who is a medical doctor, and she talks about one of her patients who was using, I guess, nicotine replacement therapy, not to get off smoking, but for the comfort she got from the nicotine. And this particular woman, Dr. Anna Fells, this was 2016, so it's just a little over a year ago, writing, the title of the op-ed was, "Can Nicotine Be Good for You?" And she writes, "Nicotine has been shown to improve cognition, memory, attention, and mood, as well as reduce anxiety. People with serious mental illnesses, particularly schizophrenia and depression, smoke at much higher rates than people without them and have more trouble quitting. Perhaps because nicotine ameliorates some of their symptoms." Well, I mean, this is pretty amazing stuff to be seeing on the op-ed pages of the New York Times, written by a psychiatrist who is also a medical doctor. I probably should check and see if any letters to the editor were published condemning her. She goes on to say, "Several experts in the field agreed that there are no well-documented serious harmful effects of non-tobacco nicotine products, other than addiction. In other words, nicotine is like most of the medicines I prescribe." This is Dr. Anna Fells. Well, I would disagree with her in a number of ways. First of all, tobacco, which contains nicotine, has been smoked for 8,000 years. Most of these medicines that Dr. Fells is prescribing, while they can be helpful for people, are very new, relatively, and we have not seen the long-term side effects. There is a fellow here in Cambridge who is a science writer, as a matter of fact, Bob, and I can't remember his last name, but he is of the opinion that because of all these psychoactive medications that people have been taking in this country for about, let's say, 30 to 40 years, the number of people on disability, totally being unable to work for mental conditions, has increased tremendously. And he thinks it's the side effects from all these psychoactive medications. Now, even if you believe tobacco increases your risk of certain diseases, many people have smoked tobacco for 50 or 60 or 70 years even, and they have been able to write great books, create movies, create music, do all kinds of things, and not go on disability for mental diseases. So I think that nicotine and tobacco are far better for people with mental issues than the medicines that Dr. Fells prescribes, except they're not as powerful. So sometimes if people need a more powerful medication, I would not deny them that, and do not deny that there may be some benefit. Well, I thought, talking about nicotine and the comfort that tobacco gives you, we would go to something that appeared, I think, in the New York Times, either online or on their paper recently, and thought it was a really great photo. And this is a photo. Well, I'll read verbatim from the New York Times. This was not a man who needed to be lectured on the health hazards of smoking. All right, let me take a phone call if I can figure out how to do it. I wonder if it's Paul again. You're on the smoking section. You're on the smoking section?
Yes, can you hear me?
I certainly can.
Yes, very good. Would you spend some time speaking on the would you speak on the nutritional benefits of cigarettes?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
The body requires certain vitamins and minerals in order to maintain a healthy body.
Yes.
Would you speak on the building blocks of nutrition that
I will be happy to. Thank you for calling. Let me just finish with this photo here. This is, I'm going to read it again. This was not a man who needed to be lectured on the health hazards of smoking. A wounded German getting a light for his cigarette from a British soldier. The caption in the New York Times midweek pictorial. This was in 1917, and we can see how much soldiers valued tobacco, the comfort it gave them, the ability to be alert and to withstand hardships. Well, someone just called up and asked about the nutritional aspects of tobacco, and tobacco is a very good appetite suppressant. So people who are faced with food shortages, such as, and have to spend great deals of time without a lot of food, find tobacco very helpful because it reduces their appetite. In addition to that, it helps people in our society. One of the biggest problems is that we have too much food. We live in a society where we have too many choices and too much food around. And therefore, for many of us, we have weight problems which contribute to all kinds of diseases. Tobacco helps us avoid overeating. It's not a panacea, but it does help people to avoid overeating. And most people who are fat and smoke would be fatter if they didn't smoke. And one of the great examples of that is the first black mayor of Chicago, Harold Washington, whose friends and colleagues persuaded him to quit smoking. He ended up gaining 100 pounds and then dropped dead of a heart attack. Very sad. He not only did he deprive himself of a pleasure that he had, but it ended up destroying him. And he thought he was doing it to improve his health. In addition to that, I think most people find it very comfortable to have a cigarette after a meal. They really enjoy it. I believe that tobacco does aid in the digestion of food somewhat, and relaxes the whole body and the mind a bit, and that's always very conducive to properly digesting food and properly making use of the nutrients you've got in the food. So, whereas tobacco itself will not supply the nutrients and the building blocks, as my caller so aptly put it, it will, I think, help to keep people very. It will help. It will help in basic keeping the metabolism in line and keeping the weight in line, and so forth and so on. So I think it does have a very important place, in how we relate to food and how we digest food. Now, for example, recently, again on our Facebook page, this was posted. The Bureau of Prisons in Missouri, because of a court order, has banned inmates from smoking, which is very interesting because smoking is something that really helps you endure not only physical hardship, but psychic hardship. So, for example, in the Geneva Convention, which was, I guess, probably between the First World War and the Second World War, it was agreed upon by nations that prisoners of war would not be forbidden to smoke. They would have access to tobacco, which certainly helps them pass the time and ease the hardships that they would experience. That's why soldiers always smoke. But now, and that's why a lot of prisoners smoke. So, and of course, they're predicting that this will be a health benefit from the smokers, but it's kind of and save the Bureau of Prisons money. But they're instituting this ban, and I wonder if there'll be any follow-up. I mean, I wonder if 2 years later they're going to look at the medical costs of the prisoners, and they're going to look at any other factors that will show, oh, we really in fact did improve health. Or, in fact, are they going to see a deterioration of health on the prisoners and no savings? Like for the last 40 or 50 years, we have completely heard that if you reduce the smoking rates in this country, it will be savings, billions of dollars in medical costs. And the smoking rate in this country has decreased by about 50%. In Massachusetts, it's decreased a great deal. We have only about 15% of the adult population smoking now. Yet year after year after year, not only do we see medical savings in the country or in this state, but year after year after year, medical costs continue to increase. So even though they predict this, and even though they say that medical authorities and state officials and politicians say that tobacco smoking costs the state a lot of money, we don't see any savings. We see medical costs continuing to climb, and the hospitals are filled with people, filled with non-smokers. So I maintain that there has been no benefit, certainly from an improvement in health or any medical cost savings in the country. And right now, Massachusetts gets close to $1 billion a year in tobacco revenues. And I would also submit that close to $1 billion is what keeps the close to universal medical care that we have in this state, so that if people, if the smoking rate went down to zero, I think the state of Massachusetts would be in big trouble, would see no cost savings, would see no improvements in health, contrary to what everyone says. But they never do any follow-ups. They make these predictions, and then they never look and say, well, geez, here is what we've got from it, and we have reduced our medical costs here in Massachusetts. So Tomorrow, I'm hoping that my letter to the editor of the Cambridge Chronicle will be in the Chronicle, because the Chronicle comes out on Thursday, and where I question the evidence in the Berkshire Street fire that was last December 3, which the authorities say was caused by careless smoking. But as I explained on the program last week, the evidence really, I don't think, is very strong. I don't think the evidence is totally absent. Primarily their evidence is they could not find a heat source, and there were people smoking near the vicinity. But I think there's an inclination on the part of fire investigators to blame smoking when it's easy to blame smoking, and it's often easy to blame smoking, and then you don't have to look for anything that might be harder to come up with. Certainly there's no physical evidence linking cigarette smoking to the fire directly. There's just kind of a circumstantial evidence people were smoking nearby, there was a fire. Not good enough for me. I hope they publish my letter, and we'll see what happens. Thanks for watching the smoking section. Good night.